For centuries, mankind has pondered the question, are we the only intelligent beings in the universe? Among the billions of stars out there, might there be other forms of life, perhaps far more advanced than us? This question remains a mystery, but regular reports of UFOs, unidentified flying objects, which appear from time to time in places all over the world, add fuel to the debate. One of the most famous UFO incidents of all time took place in the skies above Marlborough, and this Argosy aircraft played a central role in the dramatic events. The Kaikoura UFOs, as they became known, created a worldwide media frenzy. They also sparked formal government inquiries and intensive scientific investigation in New Zealand and the United States. But they remain a mystery to this day. So join us now aboard the Argosy as we return to the skies above Kaikoura and hear what really happened on that dramatic night from the people who were there. It all started on a warm, clear Marlborough evening just before Christmas 1978, and at Air Force Base Woodbourne, Ian Uffendell was doing his routine evening patrol.
Well, I was a warrant officer in the RNZAF based at Woodbourne, and on the night in question I was the orderly officer for the base, and about 11:30 I went out to do my last rounds, something I was always meticulous in doing. And as I got down to the corner of the tarmac here, I saw what I thought was a Bristol freighter coming in to land direct from the beacon at Cape Campbell. And I stopped to watch it come in, and it never came. So after a few minutes, I decided to go up to the control tower and talk to the duty controller. We went up there and he got the binoculars out and had a look, and he said, oh, I think it might be a DC-8 going into Wellington. He said, you can see its landing light beam. And he gave me the binoculars, and I said to him, well, if that's a DC-8, I said, it's just done a split-arse turn in its own length because the landing light's now pointing in the other direction. And he said to me, oh, he said, perhaps we're getting a visit from the little green men. And we both had a bit of a laugh about that. And he said, I think I'll ring the chaps in Wellington radar and see if they've got anything.
We saw targets on the radar which we could correlate with lights in the sky, but what they were, I've no idea. I wish I did. The radar matched the visual sighting in that case perfectly.
There was 3 lights, a big one in the middle and a small one on either side, and they were equidistant from the big one. They came up and then they did an arc, a perfect arc of a circle, 90 degrees, and they moved off to in a westerly direction, and they moved back towards the big light in an easterly direction, slowly, periodically sending out these beams of light. And I couldn't help thinking that this was somebody or something searching for something on the ground or out at sea or wherever they were.
We'd had phone calls, mind you, of people who'd seen strange lights in the Hutt Valley. Blenheim were reporting that people had seen strange lights off Blenheim. We had someone else ring us up and ask us if there was an aircraft flying over here because they could hear this funny whistling noise. And then we were seeing these things on the radar. So there was an awful lot of it of, this is something different, this is unusual, you know, it was a, this is, hey, what is this?
In the area at the time were 2 Argosy aircraft on their normal night freight runs. The puzzled radar operators called them up and asked them to keep a lookout for any unusual lights. Over the next 2 hours, both Argosys flew along the Kaikoura coast, and both crews were astounded by what they saw.
And then the radar voice came on and said, look, we've got something out here that on our screens that we haven't identified. Would you care to help us?
10 o'clock view range 30 miles is a large target. This one tracked out from Wellington. We saw it first of all 30 miles out from Wellington. It tracked out to 60 miles and remained stationary for about 3/4 of an hour and has now moved about 20 miles to the west.
And then he said, well, we've got a large object on your port wing direction. Can you see that? Well, in the Argosy you can't see out unless you lean forward. So we leaned forward, both Ian and I did, and we saw this large object.
We popped out of this cloud and here was this light, but so close that it was almost frightening. You know, what the hang is that?
Do we have a bright red glowing light out to our 10 o'clock position? Hard to say what range it is, but it's definitely airborne.
I think at the time I described it as being the size of a house burning in the sky, and that's actually what it looked like. You know, like a house fire, that sort of intensity of colour, but a little bit pear-shaped.
Jackpot.
The southbound Argosy has seen a big red thing.
My God.
Yes, about 10,000 feet. Yeah, 2,000 feet above him. Yeah, we can see it too on radar.
The big target that we had out to the southeast came across again, turned with the Argosy and tracked and paced him for a good 10 minutes or 20 miles. I'm not sure what the Argosy's cruising speed was, but it was certainly keeping pace level on the Argosy's wingtip.
I must admit the back of my neck went a bit funny. The old hair in the back of my neck a wee bit. I don't know what happened to Ian. He wouldn't tell me if I asked him, so I didn't ask him.
Yeah, it was a bit of a concern. I mean, it was an enormous thing to look at, and obviously very hot and appearing to be on fire. The last thing you'd want to do is get too close to it.
The atmosphere was so electric that night, it really was.
And that's why the bright red one.
We thought met balloons. We thought weather, but there was no weather because it gin clear night. Radar malfunction? No, we didn't think so. Everything else was good. The Argosies were where they said they were, so everything seemed to be functioning normally. We just had these strange returns on the radar. There were all sorts of theories came up, but most people were sort of genuinely interested in what we had seen and what happened that night. It was very exciting.
They were looking for something. That's the only explanation for these beams of light that kept coming down. And I know that the next day in the newspaper here, there were reports from people living down the coast who said that there were these lights that came down out of the sky, lighting up the ground and the sea.
Next day, the word spread that something very strange was happening in the skies above Kaikoura. Newspapers, TV and radio reported the story, and it caught the attention of another journalist, Leonard Lee, at Channel O in Melbourne, Australia.
I heard a newscast, the 11 o'clock news, and I heard something that actually caught my attention quite profoundly. And it was the story of an encounter here between two freight airline pilots and some unidentified flying objects in the Kaikoura skies that had been confirmed by government radar. As it turned out, we had another New Zealand reporter in our newsroom. His name was Quentin Fogarty. I contacted Quentin and said, Quentin, are you aware that there's been a big UFO encounter over there? And Quentin said to me on the phone, yes. He said, I am aware of it. And I said, I've got permission for you to go and hire a freelance film crew, if you'll break your holidays for a couple of days, and go and do what we call a recap. So Quentin said, yeah, I'll see what I can do. He rang me a couple of 3-4 days later and said, look, I've got it organised. I've got the same plane, the same route, but different pilots. And he said, we're going to fly on December the 30th. So I said, fantastic. I said, you know, just let me know the freight number of the film and the sound tapes and send them back with a script, you know, record a voiceover, and I'll put it together back here and that'll be fine. Thanks very much.
I thought the job would be interesting. It was a good story. We were following up a strong UFO sighting. I had an interest in that. But I didn't for one second even begin to imagine that we would get involved in something ourselves.
I guess I was quite sceptical about the whole thing, but then I got the call from Quentin Fogarty to say, can go and do a job. He'd like to go up on the Argosy the following weekend, do the same route that VERN POWELL had done, and so am I interested? And I said, oh yeah, I'll do it, I'll do it.
So Quentin and the film crew prepared to fly a routine Argosy freight trip from Wellington to Christchurch. There would be 5 people on board that night: pilots Bill Startup and Bob Guard, reporter Quentin, cameraman David Crockett, and David's wife NGAIRE, the sound recordist.
I was a bit apprehensive. You know, when I first got on, it was nothing like I'd ever seen before, and it was absolutely chocker full of newspapers. We had to sort of climb over the newspapers to get to the rear seats to strap in. It just felt like that at any minute it was going to swing away and you'd be gone out, because there were no like inside walls, or it was just like a big shell. Yeah, it's amazing aircraft.
And was actually just doing a stand-up to camera, and only got into the first part of the stand-up to camera, and Captain Bill Startup yelled down, "You better get up here because the same thing's happening again."
We're now approaching the Clarence River, where the highest concentration of UFOs was sighted on the morning of December the 21st.
We'd just completed the first take, and I think it was Bill who put his head down the hatch and said, "You guys better get up here quickly." So I wanted to get up the stairs, but David wanted to do take 2. And if the cameraman wants take 2, then we do take 2. So we did take 2 and then went up the stairs.
It's a beautiful, clear night outside, and naturally we'll be looking out for anything unusual.
Well, David started off on this seat here, and Quentin was to the left of him at that stage, and I was just crouched down on the floor behind the seat. We sort of moved around the whole time as David was filming out of different windows to catch the lights.
Went up, leaned over the co-pilot to try and see this object that the radar station from Wellington was telling us was behind us, and then coming up alongside us, and so just pressed the button of the camera and let it run.
The very first thing we saw was these sort of balls of light that would just appear in the sky. And I mean, it was really just looking through small windows at a very, very black sky and seeing pulsating lights. That started usually as a very, very small pinprick of light and then would glow into like a great globe of light.
We have a strong target at 12 o'clock to you at 20 miles.
Roger, we have that one also, and quite a good visual display at the moment.
It's showing light.
It looks like a collection of lights.
Okay.
It was all right at the beginning. It was quite exciting that suddenly there were lights, but I had never seen anything as bright as that. And they were like bright lights, and then they would just dip away and then come back somewhere else over a little bit further. But they definitely did not look like a reflection of a light. They were too, it was like they were too solid or too, and they weren't the same shape, they weren't the same size. You know, there was like one big light and there was like, you know, a couple of smaller lights.
14,000 feet we were up, beautiful clear night, no turbulence whatsoever. Zoomed in and out of this object, and I thought it was fairly close to the Argosy because it seemed to be so bright. But when Dr. Bruce Maccabee, the optical physicist from the United States, came down and he did all the analysis of everything, went over the film footage and looked at everything, he said, "Did you know that that object was 5 miles from you? And probably as big as a 2-story building."
The flight continued down the coast, cameraman David doing his best to film the lights from the cramped flight deck, and NGAIRE recording Quentin's commentary.
They're still there. You can see the one to the right of us is still reasonably bright. We can see them, but it's just about impossible to film them, because by the time the cameraman gets his focus, knows exactly where they are, they disappear again.
People have commented on my commentary a few times and said that I sounded, you know, very calm, collected and everything. But people who know me, and I myself know that there was quite a degree of strain in that commentary. To people who don't know me, it may have sounded calm and collected, but to me and to my friends and family, I sounded like I was under some duress.
The atmosphere on board was electric and becoming increasingly tense, especially when Wellington radar reported that one of the objects was now following immediately behind them.
We've just heard from Wellington radar that we've got an object about a mile behind us and it's following us. Let's hope they're friendly.
Sierra Alpha Echo, there's a strong target right in formation with you now. Could either be left or right, but your target has doubled its size.
So Captain Startup turned the Argosy around in 2 complete circles, trying to see what was going on.
A week or 2 prior to this flight, we had heard about the Valentish incident in Australia, where Valentish was flying from the mainland to Tasmania and radioed back that he was being zapped by bright lights and everything. And then the audio went dead. They've never found him. They've never found any records. They've never found anything. And I think when Captain Bill's Startup got the okay to fly off course towards this object, I think the feeling was amongst all of us, are we going to get zapped? You know, is something going to happen? Are we going to be taken away? So there was some anxiety there.
What really got me unnerved, because there was something on our tail, they'd picked up something on our tail, that he wanted to do a turn so he could see what was behind him. And when you're crouched down in a plane, taking sound, and this monstrous bird you're in, it turns, you know, right round in the, yeah, it was, and there seemed like a whole glow in the plane, and I just did not want to touch the sides of the plane. It just seemed as if it would be hot. And I don't expect I've ever told anybody this before, but there was a whole glow in the plane. We could see our way from the upstairs right down to the rear as clear as if it was a daylight. Quentin was already in his seat by the time I got there, and he just grabbed hold of my hands, and you know, he was not very happy about, you know, the whole feeling. It was a really scary feeling at that stage.
The mysterious lights continued to follow the plane almost all the way to Christchurch. Everyone was relieved when the Argosy finally landed in the early hours of the morning.
Well, I'd already said, there's no way would go back on that plane. But at that stage, that was supposed to be the end of the job anyway. So I was quite happy that we were down on the ground. Oh, yeah. I couldn't wait to get out.
When we climbed off the Argosy, and I mentioned it to Bill's Startup, I put my hands down alongside the aircraft to get down, and there seemed to be some sort of electricity on the outside. It was like a magnetism. You know how you pick up, you can open a wrapping of cellophane or something and it'll stick to your finger. It was the same feeling like that on the outside of the Argosy. And I mentioned it to 1 or 2 people. I think NGAIRE also picked that up. She said, oh, it's something like magnetic.
I wasn't relieved to get on the ground. I was excited to get on the ground. You know, we wanted to talk to the air traffic controllers in Christchurch, you know, to find out what they'd seen. You know, we felt we were caught up in something pretty extraordinary.
We're now in the radar room at Christchurch Airport. It's about 1:45, and in about another 20 minutes we intend to take off again in the Argosy and retrace the route we took only a few moments earlier. We've just heard from Wellington radar that there are still targets in the Kaikoura area. So this time we're hoping to get better film than we did last time, and all I can say is we'll see what happens.
When the opportunity came along to go back on the flight, I mean, I thought about it. I mean, my wife was at the airport at this point, and in some ways I wanted that sort of reassurance and affection and love, and not to go back on this silly plane, back into that dark sky. But at the same time, I thought, well, you know, you never know, there might be some more up there, so we went back.
So the Argosy, without NGAIRE, took off from Christchurch and headed back along the coast toward Blenheim. It didn't take long before they were right in the thick of it again.
They were brilliant white, silvery white starbursts. It was unusual in that they were going vertically up and down, probably 6, 7, maybe even 8,000 feet, at a rate that, in my view, precluded them from being anything that I'd known about, like helicopters or whatever.
I'm now looking over towards the right of the aircraft, and we have an object confirmed by Wellington radar. It's been following us for quite a while. It's about 4 miles away, and it looks like a very faint star, but then it emits a very bright white and green light. I must admit, this is just a little bit frightening.
The objects we saw on the way down were quite amazing because they were the ones that had the most sort of hypnotic quality. They were big, they pulsated, they were sort of yellow, red and orange, and they formed sort of perfect spheres, so they were pretty spectacular. On the way back, that wasn't as brilliant in terms of the colours. It was more a steady sort of yellow orange light the whole time. But when we lost that object on the way back and before we landed at Blenheim, we got the same sort of display again that we'd seen on the way down, which was quite spectacular.
It was an object that I've always described like a squashed orange. It was the colour of an orange, but instead of round, it was more elliptical. To me, this was the most visual and interesting phenomenon that I've ever seen.
Well, this is the camera that shot that object way back in 78, 79. It's a very weighty camera, especially with the magazine filled with film. And what I had to do was lean over like this over the co-pilot to try and shoot this object. And then I would be focusing, zooming, and trying to do all that in a very, very small cabin.
Once again, the objects were tracked by Wellington radar and also showed up on the Argosy's own radar system. They fell from view as the aircraft swung around Cape Campbell and turned west for its landing at Blenheim. It was just after 3 a.m, and by that stage, even the pilots had had enough.
Too right, there was, and I decided, home we go. I'm not going any more. Yes, it was a bit frightening in the finish. I don't know, Bob, what it's saying, I don't know. You ask him, I don't know. But I know I was concerned. Down we go, thank you very much.
Next day, the story was big news, and it just kept getting bigger.
I don't think any of us realised what the outcome was going to be of this, of what the publicity was going to be. All hell broke loose, you know. I had phone calls the next day come in from Walter Cronkite in the US wanting us to go up and do some interviews up there.
I got a phone call from the Chief of Staff at Channel O. Neil was babbling on the phone. This is about 8 in the morning or something. He said, Leonard, he said, you know that Quentin Fogarty was going up last night on that flight. He said he went up on the flight and he said, you will not believe this, but he said it happened again and they filmed it. I nearly fell off the telephone.
As the news spread, Argosy Captain Bill Startup and First Officer Bob Guard were flown to Wellington for TV interviews.
Theorise what it was? I can't. It just appeared to be a light. It was unidentified as far as I was concerned.
Bill Startup was doing his professional best to explain.
Could that have been the planet Venus we saw as we came out of Christchurch?
No, no way. And the planet Venus doesn't sort of pass beneath our aircraft. We went that far up in space.
You had it on your own aircraft radar as well, did you not?
That's correct, yes. And it was in the range from 15 to 12 miles from time to time.
Can you personally think of any rational, logical explanation for what you saw last night?
No, I can't. I saw it, but I don't know what it is.
Air Force Skyhawks were put on alert, and an Orion surveillance aircraft was dispatched to search the area. Meanwhile, Quentin Fogarty headed back to Melbourne with the precious film in his briefcase.
Somebody picked Quentin up from the airport and brought him back to the channel, and I remember him emerging from the darkness with a can of film. And he said, as he handed it to me, "It's my story, isn't it?" And I said, "Of course it's your story, Quentin." I was very proud of what he had done.
The film initially was extraordinarily disappointing when we watched it. I mean, it only got exciting, and we only started to yell a little bit when we slowed it down and put it in extreme slow motion because there was camera movement. And when we slowed it down, it was exciting.
We looked at that very closely, and it was just rising excitement. And I will never forget the words of Quentin Fogarty after we'd seen a little bit. He was beside himself. We all were, you know. But Quentin suddenly yelled out, "Geronimo, we got the bastards." So we then knew that we had something. So we put the thing together. We managed to get Quentin cogent enough to sit in the studio and present the piece, and we put it out to air that night.
Good evening, I'm Quentin Fogarty. The film you've just seen was shot from the cabin of an aircraft early Sunday morning local time.
The phones kept going mad. It just about blew our switchboard apart. We rated like we'd never rated before. People were absolutely fascinated by it.
What you have just seen, we believe, is the best documented evidence ever of an unidentified flying object. The encounter is unique because it was seen by 5 people in the cabin of that plane. It was visible on radar in both Wellington and Christchurch. It was also visible on the aircraft's own radar system. Perhaps more importantly, it was finally recorded on television film. It fulfilled all the requirements.
The world had been told about the story. All of a sudden, the insults, the doubters, the skeptics started surfacing. And it wasn't long before we started hearing, "Oh, it must have been Jupiter, must have been Venus, might have been a meteor. No, it could have been a hoax." A hoax? I couldn't believe it.
I was convinced that what we saw on television was Venus in the morning sky. Venus is very bright. It is frequently mistaken for a UFO, and the colour could be accounted for by the fact that it was so low in the sky, just as the sun and the moon become orange and pink when they are low in the sky.
Venus has never appeared on an air traffic control radar, to the best of my knowledge.
Venus hadn't even risen in the morning sky that time, you know. Captain Bill Startup got the permission to go towards this object. We went off course and went towards it. I was filming and it just disappeared. And as soon as it disappeared, Captain Startup says, "Oh, it's gone off our screen," and the radar station said, "Well, it's gone off ours too." Venus must move very quickly.
In my opinion, the UFO seen on that night, which is basically a tornado which can burn a gaseous fuel and give the impression of being a fireball. The ball of flame can move up and down or side to side, can shift around quite dynamically, but seeing that at night would present quite a spectacle.
The lights on a squid boat are very large electric lights. It's a very, very bright light. One of the conclusions was that it may have been due to the presence of squid boats.
The reason we don't think they were squid boats is because the targets were moving at aircraft speeds. They were following the Argosy, matching its speed. Squid boats don't go that fast. No commercial boat goes that fast.
Oh, squid boats go, what, 380 miles an hour, was it, that the Argosy flew? Oh, gosh, they're wonderful, aren't they? They keep up with an Argosy that's going that fast. And I wasn't pointing down to the ocean. I was pointing the camera level at 14,000 feet that this object was following us.
I think in many ways the straight reporting of the story initially was fine. It was just after that when you start then bringing in so-called experts and things, and then you bring in people who got airplay, who suggested we had hoaxed it. You know, that when it started to get to that very personal stage where people started to really question your integrity, that hurt.
What it was years ago, we don't know. And
That's all it can be. I wish I knew. Well, people can think about that, but they were not on the aircraft.
Dr. Bruce Maccabee did a very good report on it. He studied it for a long, long time, and I think the report was very good. There was some question about the loop that this object did, whether it was camera shutter problem. I checked the camera again after that and it didn't seem to do that, so maybe the object did do that. It was so quick that I wouldn't have noticed it. The only time I would have picked it up was watching the film, you know.
I mean, I did the interview for TV3 in New Zealand just recently, and, you know, TV3, the producer called me and said, I'm getting these calls from people who say that, you know, this never happened, that it was a squid fishing boat. And I'm thinking, didn't we put that to bed 30 years ago?
There had been a sighting by a gentleman down at Kaikoura a couple of nights before, and an object rose up from down in the Marlborough Sounds and wobbled its way over Warramunga Bay and over Port Underwood and disappeared. And I believe that that was a UFO and that it crashed, and what we saw was the search and rescue team looking for it.
As I said in the start, I was a skeptic to all this, but I'm not now. There's something going on out there, and it was captured on film. It was seen by all the people in the aircraft. It was seen by people on the ground. It was captured on 2 radar stations, both in Wellington and Christchurch. So are we being watched like we're watching, sending probes to Mars and beyond, right out of our galaxy? Perhaps somebody's doing the same to us.
They were the brightest lights I had ever seen. I have no idea what they were, but they were definitely, well, it was unidentified. They were flying because they were moving so quickly, and it obviously was an object because it was showing up on both radars. So if that is what a UFO is, that's what it was that night. An unidentified flying object. And there were several of them. And it was scary.
At some time in the future, we may find out exactly what those objects were that flew with the Argosy in the skies above Kaikoura. More likely it will remain a mystery forever. And for the people involved, it will always be a unique and life-changing experience that they will never forget.
I'm glad I wasn't on that aeroplane, because I don't think I would have survived it psychologically. Now, Quentin Fogarty was on that aeroplane. He's a very good journalist. I saw Quentin collapse on my floor in my office some 4 days later from the pressure that this thing had created, the impact. It's almost like being, you know, zapped with a stun gun. I saw him actually fall off his chair and fall on the floor and curl into a fetal position.
I mean, the only real effect on me, was the fact that I got what's described as nervous exhaustion and ended up in hospital, right? So I was, for a couple of weeks, I was just out of it because I hadn't slept and there was all the pressure, there was all the stuff going on. So it had a dramatic effect on me in a physical and a mental sense, but just in the aftermath of what happened. After that, no.
It had all sorts of effects on everybody. I just couldn't sleep for many nights, you know. It was because it started to be such a big story, and I decided that I would make a documentary about it, and so that's what I did. And that documentary really took me around part of the world doing lectures and things like that. It was a big change in my life and the life of my family, you know.
Everything sort of went wrong for us. David went on an overseas trip to sell the documentary. He went to Australia and then he went to America, where he was invited to a big UFO conference there. And then he went on to England and he never came home. So UFOs did a lot, you know, didn't do me any favours. I'd never do it again.
Everybody thinks that we've made a lot of money out of this UFO thing. The only people who've made any money are the big networks. It was sold to CBS or something, I think. Was that the one that Cronkite belonged to? It was sold to them for I don't know how much money, but probably $200,000 or $300,000 or more, you know. I didn't see any of that, you know. And nobody in our aircraft to Argosy that was concerned with that place made any money out of this. So I want everybody to know we didn't make any money.
I have very strong spiritual beliefs. You know, I believe in God and all of that sort of stuff. And to me, this could have been quite possible, you know, that they came from another dimension. They may have been coming here to take over the Earth, you know. And in that case, then we should align ourselves with a force that could resist that, a force for good.
If you would like to know more about the Kaikoura UFO mystery, Captain Startup's fascinating book, The Kaikoura UFOs, is available in the terminal. For the full Safe Air and Argosy story, the award-winning television documentary The Final Flight is also available on DVD.